I've been working Vegas security for 23 years, and I thought I'd seen everything. Drunks, fights, marriage proposals gone wrong, celebrity meltdowns. But what I witnessed on the night of August 12th, 1994 at the MGM Grand Garden Arena taught me that sometimes the most powerful response to hate isn't more hate. It's something I never expected. My name is David Chen, and that night I was working crowd control for Whitney Houston's sold-out Vegas show. The energy in the room was electric. 18,000 people packed into that arena, all of them there to see the woman with the voice that could move mountains. But there was one person in that crowd who wasn't there to worship Whitney Houston. He was there to tear her down. His name was Marcus Thompson. Though we didn't know it at the time, all we knew was that around 9:45 p.m., about 40 minutes into Whitney's set, this guy in section 104 started causing problems. Whitney had just finished an incredible version of How Will I Know and was transitioning into Greatest Love of All. The crowd was on their feet, swaying, singing along. That's when we heard it. "You're a fraud." The voice cut through the music like a knife. "You don't believe a word you're singing." Whitney stopped mid-verse. The band, confused, gradually went silent. 18,000 people turned to look at the source of the disruption. Marcus Thompson was standing in his seat, swaying slightly. Even from my position near the stage, I could tell he was drunk. His face was red. His shirt was untucked, and he was pointing aggressively at Whitney. "You sing about loving yourself," Marcus shouted, his words slurring together. "But you're just another fake celebrity. You don't know anything about real life, about real pain." The crowd started booing immediately. People around him were telling him to sit down, to shut up. My colleagues were already moving toward his section, ready to remove him. This was standard procedure. Drunk heckler disrupts show, security escorts him out. Show continues. But Whitney held up her hand. She held up her hand. And somehow, impossibly, 18,000 people went silent. Even my fellow security guards stopped in their tracks, waiting to see what she would do. "Sir," Whitney said into her microphone, her voice calm but carrying clearly through the arena. "What's your name?" Marcus seemed taken aback by the question. He'd expected to be thrown out, not engaged in conversation. "Marcus," he finally said, his voice still aggressive but slightly uncertain now. "Marcus Thompson." "Marcus," Whitney repeated. "Why are you here tonight?" "To tell you the truth," Marcus shouted back. "To tell all these people that you're selling them lies. You stand up there in your fancy dress, singing about self-love and inner strength, but you don't know anything about what it's like to hate yourself, to feel like you're worthless." The crowd was getting restless now. People were shouting at Marcus to leave, but Whitney kept her hand raised, keeping everyone calm. "You're right," Whitney said simply. The arena went dead silent. Even Marcus seemed stunned. "I don't know your story, Marcus," Whitney continued. "I don't know what you've been through or what brought you here tonight, but you're right about one thing. When I sing Greatest Love of All, sometimes I don't believe the words I'm singing." You could have heard a pin drop in that arena. Whitney Houston, the woman who'd sold millions of records with that song, was admitting that she struggled with its message. "Because loving yourself," Whitney said, her voice now filled with emotion, "is the hardest thing any of us will ever do. It's not something you achieve once and then it's done. It's something you have to choose every single day. And some days I fail at it. Some days I look in the mirror and I don't like what I see. Some days I feel like a fraud too." Marcus had sat down now, but he was still visible in the crowd, still listening. "So Marcus," Whitney said, "I have a proposition for you. Instead of you standing there telling me I'm a fraud, why don't you come up here and tell me your story? Tell all of us why you're so angry tonight. Because I don't think you're angry at me. I think you're angry at yourself, and maybe if we hear your story, we can help you." My colleagues and I looked at each other in disbelief. Was Whitney Houston really inviting a hostile heckler onto the stage? Marcus stood up again, this time less steady on his feet. "You want me to come up there?" "I do," Whitney said. "I want to understand why you're hurting, because that's what I hear in your voice, Marcus. Not anger, pain." The walk from section 104 to the stage seemed to take forever. Security escorted Marcus, not forcefully, but supportively, as if he were an invited guest rather than a disruptive heckler. The crowd watched in stunned silence. When Marcus reached the stage, Whitney came down the stairs to meet him at stage level. Up close, I could see that Marcus was younger than I'd thought, probably in his early 30s. His eyes were red, not just from alcohol but from crying. Whitney took his hand gently and led him up the stairs to the stage. Someone brought out a stool, and Whitney gestured for Marcus to sit. "Okay, Marcus," Whitney said, sitting on a stool next to him. "We're all listening. Tell us what's really going on." For a moment, Marcus just sat there, looking out at 18,000 faces all turned toward him. Then he started to cry. Not subtle tears, but deep, body-shaking sobs. "I lost my daughter," Marcus finally said, his voice breaking. 3 months ago, she was 6 years old. Leukemia. The arena's energy shifted instantly. Anger transformed into compassion. People who'd been booing moments earlier were now silent, listening. "Her name was Sarah," Marcus continued. "And she loved you. God, she loved you so much. She had all your albums. She'd play Greatest Love of All every morning before school. She'd stand in front of the mirror and sing it to herself." Whitney reached over and took Marcus's hand. She wasn't performing anymore. She was just a person sitting with another person who was in pain. "The last time I saw her," Marcus said, "before she went into the hospital for the last time, she made me promise her something. She said, 'Daddy, promise me you'll learn to love yourself. The way Whitney's song says, promise me you won't be sad forever.'" Marcus wiped his eyes roughly. "But I can't do it. I wake up every morning hating myself for not being able to save her, for not being able to take her place. I look in the mirror and I see a father who failed, who couldn't protect his little girl." "So, when I heard you were performing in Vegas," Marcus continued, "I bought a ticket. I don't even know why. Maybe I wanted to feel close to Sarah somehow. But when you started singing that song, the one she loved so much, I just got so angry. Because how dare you sing about loving yourself when my daughter is dead? How dare you sell hope when there is no hope?" Whitney was crying. Now, too. So was half the arena. I saw grown men wiping their eyes, women holding each other. "Marcus," Whitney said softly, "can I tell you something?" Marcus nodded, unable to speak. 2 years ago," Whitney said, "I almost killed myself." The confession hung in the air like a physical thing. Whitney Houston, one of the most successful performers in the world, had just admitted to suicidal thoughts in front of 18,000 people. "I was at the top of my career," Whitney continued. "I had everything anyone could want: money, fame, success. But I looked in the mirror and I hated what I saw. I felt like a fraud, just like you said. Because how could I sing about love and strength when I felt so empty inside?" Whitney turned to look directly at Marcus. "The only thing that stopped me was thinking about all the people who needed me to keep going. My family, my fans, the little girls like your Sarah, who sang my songs in the mirror every morning. Your daughter made you promise to learn to love yourself," Whitney said. "And that's the hardest promise anyone can ask for. Because it means choosing life every single day, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts." Whitney stood up and walked to the front of the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said to the crowd, "I want to ask you something. How many of you have lost someone you love? Thousands of hands went up throughout the arena. How many of you have looked in the mirror and hated what you saw? Even more hands rose. How many of you have felt like Marcus feels right now? Like the pain is too much to bear? The sea of hands was overwhelming. The shared pain in that room was palpable. This, Whitney said, gesturing to all those raised hands, is why I sing. Not because I have all the answers. Not because I've figured out how to love myself perfectly, but because we need each other. We need to know we're not alone in our pain. Whitney turned back to Marcus. Your daughter knew that. That's why she loved that song. Not because it's easy to love yourself, but because it's necessary. Because if we give up on ourselves, we give up on everything. Whitney extended her hand to Marcus. Will you sing it with me? Not for me, but for Sarah? Let's sing it together. And let 18,000 people help us remember why we keep going. Marcus looked terrified. I can't sing. I'm not a performer. Neither am I, Whitney said with a small smile. Not really. I'm just a person who happens to have a microphone. And tonight, you have one too. So let's be two broken people singing about hope, and let's see what happens. The band started playing Greatest Love of All. Again, but slower, more intimate. Whitney handed Marcus a microphone. I believe the children are our future, Whitney sang, her voice gentle, not the powerful performance voice but something softer, more vulnerable. Marcus just stood there, frozen, tears streaming down his face. But then something shifted. Maybe it was the alcohol lowering his inhibitions. Or maybe it was the grief finding a way out. But he started to sing. His voice was rough, untrained, cracking with emotion. But when he sang Teach Them Well and Let Them Lead the Way, something in the arena broke open. Because everyone knew he was singing about Sarah. About a little girl who'd led him here, to this moment, to this possibility of healing. Whitney's voice blended with his, supporting him, holding him up when his voice threatened to give out. And then, impossibly, 18,000 people started singing too. Not loudly, not drowning out Marcus, but joining him, supporting him, showing him that he wasn't alone in his pain. When they reached the chorus, Marcus's voice grew stronger. Learning to love yourself. It is the greatest love of all. He sang it like a question and an answer at the same time. Like he was trying to convince himself, trying to honor a promise made to a 6-year-old girl who believed in the words more than he did. By the time they finished the song, there wasn't a dry eye in the arena. Whitney wrapped Marcus in a hug, and he collapsed against her, sobbing like a child. You did it, Whitney whispered, loud enough for the microphone to catch. You kept your promise to Sarah. You sang about loving yourself, even when it hurt, even when you didn't believe it. That's what courage looks like, Marcus. That's what your daughter wanted you to learn. What happened next surprised everyone, including Whitney's own management team. Whitney made an announcement that would change Marcus's life. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, I want you to know something about this man. Marcus Thompson came here tonight broken and angry. He could have stayed home. He could have let his grief consume him. But instead, he showed up. He spoke his truth. And then he did the hardest thing anyone can do. He sang about hope when he had none. Whitney turned to Marcus. I want to help you. I don't have all the answers, and I can't rein Sarah back, but I can connect you with grief counselors who specialize in helping parents who've lost children. I can make sure you get the support you need, and I want to start something in Sarah's name. Whitney addressed the crowd again. We're going to create the Sarah Thompson Foundation, dedicated to helping families dealing with childhood cancer, and every time I perform Greatest Love of All from now on, I'm going to think about a brave little girl who loved that song, and a brave father who kept his promise to her by showing up here tonight. The arena erupted in applause, but it wasn't the usual screaming and cheering. It was something deeper, more profound. It was the sound of 18,000 people witnessing the transformation of pain into purpose. Marcus stayed for the rest of the concert. Sitting on a stool at the side of the stage, Whitney would occasionally glance over at him, checking to make sure he was okay. And slowly, over the course of the next hour, something changed in Marcus's face. The anger was gone. The hatred was fading. What remained was grief. Yes, but also something else. Hope, maybe, or at least the possibility of hope. After the show, while Whitney was meeting with her team, I stayed with Marcus. He was sobering up now, the full weight of what had happened settling over him. "I can't believe I did that," Marcus said quietly. "I came here to destroy her show and she turned it into, I don't even know what that was." "Healing," I said simply. "That was healing." Marcus nodded slowly. Sarah would have loved this. She always said Whitney was magic. I thought she just meant the singing. But this, what Whitney did tonight, that's a different kind of magic. True to her word, Whitney established the Sarah Thompson Foundation. She personally funded grief counseling for Marcus and connected him with a support group for parents who'd lost children to cancer. But more importantly, she stayed in touch with him. Phone calls, letters, occasional visits when her schedule allowed. 6 months after that night, Marcus gave his first speech at a grief support group, talking about how a moment of drunken anger had transformed into a moment of healing. A year later, he was running the Sarah Thompson Foundation, helping other families navigate the impossible pain of losing a child. "Whitney didn't just save my life that night," Marcus told me in an interview 3 years later. "She showed me that my pain had a purpose, that by sharing it, by being vulnerable about it, I could help other people who felt as lost as I did." Marcus paused, his eyes distant. "You know what the crazy thing is? I still don't fully love myself. I still have days where I look in the mirror and see a father who couldn't save his daughter. But now I also see a father who's helping other families, who's keeping Sarah's memory alive by turning our tragedy into something that helps others. That's what Whitney taught me," Marcus continued. "That loving yourself doesn't mean the pain goes away. It means choosing to keep going despite the pain. It means honoring the people we've lost by living in a way that makes their sacrifice meaningful." The story of Whitney and Marcus spread throughout the grief counseling community. Therapists began using it as an example of how vulnerability and compassion can break through even the deepest pain. Support groups would play bootleg recordings of that performance, not for the music, but for the raw humanity captured in that moment. Whitney herself was changed by the experience. In interviews afterward, she spoke more openly about her own struggles with self-worth, with depression, with the pressure of being seen as perfect. "Marcus did me a favor that night," Whitney said in a television interview a year later. "He called me a fraud, and he was right. Not because I'm a bad person, but because I'd been hiding my own struggles, pretending I had it all figured out. He gave me permission to be honest about my own pain, and in that honesty, I found something I'd been missing: authenticity." For me, working security at that concert changed how I saw my job. I'd spent 23 years viewing crowd disruptions as problems to be solved, people to be removed. Marcus taught me that sometimes the person causing the most trouble is the person who needs the most help. I started paying more attention after that night, looking for the people who weren't just drunk and disorderly, but drunk and heartbroken, disorderly and desperate. And when I could, when it was safe, I tried to engage with them rather than just remove them. I didn't always have Whitney Houston's platform or talent for turning conflict into healing. But I could listen. I could see the pain beneath the anger. The bootleg recording of that performance became one of the most treasured Whitney Houston recordings among fans. But it's not the technical quality of the singing that people value. It's the humanity. It's Whitney's admission that she struggles too. It's Marcus's broken voice trying to honor his daughter. It's 18,000 people singing softly, holding space for a stranger's grief. Today, There's a small memorial at the MGM Grand Garden Arena. It's not official, just something fans created. It's a photo of Whitney hugging Marcus on stage. And beneath it, the words, "Learning to love yourself is the greatest love of all," in memory of Sarah Thompson and all the broken people finding their way back to hope. The story of Whitney and Marcus reminds us that anger is often just pain in disguise. That the people who lash out the loudest are often the ones hurting the most. And it shows us that the strongest response to hostility isn't retaliation or removal. Sometimes it's invitation. Sometimes it's saying, "Come up here and let me understand your pain." Whitney could have had Marcus thrown out. She could have ignored his insults and continued with her show. After all, she had 18,000 other fans who'd paid to see her perform. But she chose compassion over convenience. She chose to see past the anger to the pain beneath it. She chose to stop being a performer for a moment and just be a human being connecting with another human being. And in doing so, she didn't just change Marcus's life. She showed 18,000 people what real strength looks like. It's not in the perfect performance or the flawless execution. It's in the willingness to be vulnerable, to admit our own struggles, to see someone's pain as more important than our own comfort. Marcus Thompson died in 2019, but his legacy continues through the foundation that bears his daughter's name. In his final interview before his death, he said something that perfectly captures what happened that night in Vegas. "Whitney Houston could have responded to my anger with anger. She could have been justified in doing so. I was drunk. I was insulting her. I was disrupting her show. But instead she responded with love. Not a fake surface-level love, but a deep, vulnerable, 'I understand your pain because I carry my own kind of love.' That's the greatest love of all." Marcus said, tears in his eyes. "Not loving yourself because you're perfect, but loving yourself and others despite the brokenness. Whitney taught me that, and through her, Sarah's promise taught me that. They both taught me that sometimes the greatest act of love is simply showing up, speaking your truth, and letting others help you carry the weight." The confrontation between Whitney Houston and Marcus Thompson reminds us that we never know what battles the people around us are fighting. That sometimes the most aggressive person in the room is the person in the most pain. And it shows us that we have a choice in how we respond to hostility. We can meet it with more hostility. We can remove the problem and move on. Or we can do what Whitney did. We can stop. We can listen and we can ask, what's really happening here? What pain is hiding beneath this anger? That night in Vegas, Whitney Houston turned an enemy into a friend, a heckler into a partner in healing, and a moment of conflict into a moment of transformation. She showed us all that the greatest performances aren't always the ones with the perfect notes or the standing ovations. Sometimes the greatest performances are the ones where we stop performing altogether and just be real with each other. Where we admit we're broken too. Where we sing about hope even when we don't fully believe it. Where we keep promises to people we've lost by choosing to keep going, keep trying, keep learning to love ourselves one difficult day at a time. And sometimes, if we're very brave and very human, we invite our hecklers onto the stage and sing with them, because in the end, we're all just broken people trying to keep promises, trying to find hope, trying to learn that the greatest love of all really is learning to love ourselves, despite everything. If this story moved you, remember that somewhere near you, someone's anger is hiding their pain. Maybe today is the day you stop and ask what's really wrong. Maybe today you show someone that their pain matters, that they're not alone, that healing is possible even in the darkest moments. Because that's what Whitney taught us, that the greatest gift we can give someone isn't perfection, it's presence. It's seeing their pain and saying, "I see you, I understand, and I'm not going anywhere."